Final hour of in-game live college football game day here on SportsGrid, and we are in the final quarter of Ohio State and Tennessee, and it is well on the way to ending the Volunteer season. And the Buckeyes moving on, of course, to face Oregon. Won't be easy. Ohio State 35-10, and with the ball into Tennessee territory again. 13 minutes to go in this one. So while Brady here is chasing the under and wants absolutely no more scoring the rest of the way, Ryan Day, who is still, fighting for his job in many ways, might have other ideas, Brady. But look, we've got Michael Fiddle on with us. Fiddle's Picks, the Advantage Sports Betting Podcast. Very much a numbers guy. Hopping on with us here. Perfect timing. Couldn't have planned it better. Hanging out with us for the next half hour or so. We'll get into a lot of NFL, how he is betting tomorrow, or how he's, what's already in pocket, how he plans to attack the prop market, whatever it may be. But go ahead, Mike. You shouted us out on social media. You quote tweeted yourself, which I appreciate when something is relevant. Cash out math explained back in 2023. I'm sure, coming up on 2 years later, well, a year and change later, because it was a November tweet. Still very relevant. What do you have for us?
Yeah, Adam, these are my favorite things to discuss. I am a math guy. I'm a nerd, but I focus on sports gambling, so maybe that makes me a cool nerd, but I focus on the numbers, and that's where I find my value, and that's where I make the most of my plays and find my edges. So when it comes to cashing out, and when I heard you talking about this topic, like my ears perked up because I love this stuff. We can get to the games. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's slate, but this is what really gets me going in this space, is talking about these strategy concepts and understanding how the value shakes out. Given what you were saying, I don't know the exact specifics of how many legs it was, where it was in its bet and everything, but okay, so for example, if you were using a 4-leg parlay, and I think you said the first 3 legs had already hit, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Let me ask you this, Adam. Was there an actionable reason why you were going to cash out or hedge off of it, or was it just because an enticing offer was there?
Well, again, this was not my bet. This was someone else's bet. But the actionable reason was, I don't want the bet to blow up and, get nothing for my efforts. I want to get, I'm trying to think of 10 times what I put down versus the ultimate payout of being a bit more than that. Well, no, I mean, if it hit, at this point, the cash out basically was 10x versus a full payout of being 12x. Let's call it that.
Okay, so you were right on the edge. It's pretty secure. You're going to get a 12-1. You're at 10-1. You're kind of at this place where I can lock. I'm not saying you specifically. I'm talking conjecture to people with these scenarios.
Sure.
You can tell yourself, I can lock in profit by clicking this button, right? And it seems so enticing to just step away from the table, say I guaranteed myself a return. But in reality, it's ultimately the wrong thing to do pretty much every single time. And I will explain the one caveat where it's actually worth it. So Brady talked about hedging. The cash out feature on its own will probably, let's just say you have a 90% chance of coming through on that bet, they will give you a roughly 80% chance of money in the cash out. They will cut you a good percentage off and want you to do that cash out. If you hedge, like Brady said, you could normally have the difference that they're taking away. So in this case, maybe you'd make 85% of your return instead of taking the 80%. So hedging is an option. However, I still only would recommend hedging when there's actionable reasons. Say you're watching a game and some key player gets hurt or gets ejected or starts to get into foul trouble, or these situations start to emerge. Maybe there's an actionable reason, but for the sake of I can lock in profit just because I am close, then the true answer to that is you never should have put that 4th leg in the parlay, because if you just went for a 3-leg parlay and it already hit, given the 3 legs have been completed, then your hedge or your cash out is likely to return less of a value as just putting in the 3-leg parlay to begin with. So by putting in a 4th leg and even giving your chance at the ceiling, but ultimately coming back in and saying, oh, I went 3 for 4, let me cash out, 3 for 3 would have been better. So when you're in that situation, if you're telling yourself, wow, I can win $10,000 off this $20 bet, then the correct answer would be saying, if you're going to get really antsy at a $3,000 cash out, then drop 1 leg off the parlay and have it be that $20 bet that wins $3,500, and you would end up making an extra $500. That's using very arbitrary numbers. but just a general concept of if you get close to your last leg and that's your reason to hedge, you're actually doubling down on a mistake, because parlays are generally, not the strongest EV bets. And then hedging or cashing out is another minus EV move. So if you're continuously stacking minus EV moves against each other, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot long run. You're going to end up like Plaxico Burress if we're talking late season NFL stuff right around the corner. So I would forego doing that. And then the one time that I would cash out, Adam and Brady, is if we're looking at a situation where it is $20 to win, $500K. And you have one of those, I picked 5 guys, just any one of them to score 2 touchdowns. The first 4 hit. The guy on Monday night has his first touchdown, and they're offering me life-changing money to click this button. And the rationale of trying to hedge, like Brady says, or something I like to do is try and open a middle. Play the other side. If you have a money line on a favorite, take the dog at plus points, try and pass go, collect 400, hit them all. But if you are doing this where it's like you can click cash out for life-changing money, and you can't properly hedge it because hedging that ticket would mean depositing $200,000 into your DraftKings account and trying to bet that across 10 different sports books and get enough action down to properly hedge it, it becomes impossible. So if you're going to get a huge amount of money, then screw the EV situation. Change your life, take it. Don't look to properly hedge if you have lots and lots of money, and that whatever that life-changing money to you can be, it could be half a month's rent. If that's really going to change you, then just do it.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Michael, and I like the way you've explained, the percentages and the math of it. The casino, you can't expect them to offer you a positive EV return. Yeah, certainly they're offering you a cut, and they know they could be possibly on the hook for a bigger payout. So, you kind of have to consider the source as well, who's offering you this cash out. I think the other, and you kind of allude to it, the other situation, and I remember in working with Derek Stevens and Mike Palm at Circa, we kind of changed the word hedge into monetize. Like, let's figure out a way to profit off of this deal. And I think it absolutely comes into play in Circa Survivor. And that is life-changing money. If you've made it this far, the inherent value of your ticket is close to $300,000. I have no problem with putting 50 grand or whatever, 100 grand, whatever it is, on the other side of your survivor pick. And Circa will grant you. You don't necessarily have to go dig up that money. They know the collateral that you have on the other end. So they will gladly put together a line of credit for you, and makes it pretty simple. And I think that's another situation where it's not a cash out, but it's a pretty darn good hedge.
Brady, do you know why Circa doesn't charge any VIG to enter their contests?
I don't know. What's the answer?
Because of this exact reason. Because by the end of the tournaments, people are going to open lines of credit against them and hedge them. And that is how Circa makes a rake off of these tournaments. It is still a great idea. This is where it's a win-win for Bettor, who has a equity position of $300K from a $1,000 entry, and it's profitable from Circa, who gets all this positive PR from not charging, and it's inherently a plus EV tournament to enter because you're being charged no house cut. But when you get to the final stages, you are going to be inclined to do one of those line of credit hedges, and boom, that's how the book is really making their money off the PR from winning this, EV or VIG-less tournament, and then they get all that money that they would have charged in VIG in hedges at the time of payout. Brilliant.
Cool. I like it.
So what, you thought it's smarter to be on SportsGrid? It's just a slogan? My God. Yeah, I'd say we learned a few things over the last little bit with Michael Fiddle. He's not going anywhere. We have much more on the way. We'll get into tomorrow's NFL slate. 2 games today, both won by the favorites, both covered. What's tomorrow look like?
On, Donner and Blitzen! Now, Rudolph, now!
Merry Christmas to all!
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred or just worked on the side or, kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
I remember one time, I don't know if Kenny will remember this, I said put 100 on, I think I left it on a text, put 100 on this horse that won, and then Kenny called me back later and goes, hey, I never got the text. And I'm like,
no.
Oh yeah. Remember that, Kenny?
I would never stiff anybody. What he texted me as they're loading into the gate, maybe, like it's too late.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
It's a new era in CFB to start off this year, put on full display.
My take on this game is simple. I know some people will be upset about it. Good riddance to the Pac-12.
Can you do it in terms of the week to week to week?
I don't see a pathway for this team to miss the college football playoffs.
We want to make sure you have those best bets in the entirety of our betting cards. That was thinking! But he had that program was already going there!
Only on SportsGrid.
Now that we have dissected the math with Michael Fiddle, let's get into some plays that he likes across tomorrow's NFL slate. As, oh, by the way, Ohio State, another touchdown. It's 42-10. Sorry, under's dead. If you're on the over, that is cashed. 10 minutes still to go in this game. Ohio State with the ball and at midfield. So, day in the Buckeyes. They may not be done yet here, Brady. But, all right, let's look at the NFL. And self-serving. I'm going to start with the game that I've been talking about quite a bit. Only really because we got the other side of it from Albert Wynn when he was on with us a little while ago. So, Fiddle, I mentioned I love the Lions to cover tomorrow, the 6.5. It is my favorite play on the board as far as sides go on tomorrow's slate. Albert joined us. I don't know that he necessarily doesn't believe in the Lions so much as he just thinks this is a spot, given that it's outdoors, it's golf outside, it's in Chicago, all that stuff. Like maybe this is a time that we actually do convince ourselves we back Caleb Williams and the Bears. Where do you fall on this contest?
I'm glad he's not here because I do a show with Albert every single week on covering the NBA. And so we're normally on the same side. So I wish he was here so I could say it to his face because I would. I lean the Lions here because I love the over in this spot. So if I'm going to lay the points and say that this is going to be a spot where because the Lions defense is so injured, because they're missing David Montgomery, they're really going to throw the ball and air it out. Both teams are going to be forced to score. The Lions are going to try and put up 30 points and be pressing on offense from the jump, knowing that their defense is struggling. There's a reason why Dan Campbell started kicking onside kicks with 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter last week because he didn't trust the defense to get them off the field or stop Josh Allen and keep the clock in reasonable shape. So with that offense, they're really going to push. And then on the other side, Caleb Williams coming off the game where he's like pouting on the sidelines, slanting over on the bench, and that moment goes viral. Normally you have a slight bounce back in those spots. I'm sure that's what Albert pointed to. And when Albert likes to bet, he very much likes to take home dogs and he likes to fade, public perception that maybe Caleb Williams is going to do better coming off of a really bad week, that this interim coach is getting their offense going. I do not see it for this Bears team. I see a team that is rushing towards the end of the season, and I see a Lions team that really wants, to put the foot on the gas and try and secure that 1 seed. If the Lions win out, they get the 1 seed. So that's definitely the direction that I'm looking. I think they're going to be playing with a sense of urgency. I don't really know why the Bears even want to show up to this game, except for the offense who wants to put some good things on tape with a rookie quarterback going into next season. So I see your point on the Lions, and I like the over, and those would be correlated angles as well.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you guys. I can certainly understand Albert, wanting that ugly dog, but I kind of lean Detroit here too. I think they put their foot down. I think Campbell made statements earlier in the week that this team needs to kind of negate what the storyline is in the press right now with all of a sudden the Philadelphia Eagles have been crowned NFC champion. I think the Lions are going to have something to say about that. Another great game and we're talking about this team, Philadelphia on the road at Washington laying 3.5. How do you see this one, Michael?
Philadelphia at Washington. I think this is a Philadelphia spot. I mean, we know that the action has been coming in on the Commanders side throughout the week, but when you get to Saturday, when you get to Sunday before kickoff, you have to be asking yourself which lines have maybe moved too much. Where is the value starting to come on the other side? And I think it's a spot where you could get a cheap 3.5 with the Eagles. They're by far the superior team. If you don't want to lay the points with the field goal, then just take the money line. But listen, this Commanders offense has been stuck in the mud a little bit. They've been unable to get the ball to their wide receivers since the early weeks. Terry McLaurin has incredibly slowed down. And this Eagles team, despite all the drama, is a buzzsaw. They'll win in short yardage situations. They'll beat you in both sides of the trenches. And last week, they get 100 yards to both Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown, and yet Saquon's going for the rushing record. So, this team is so complete that I'm not going to take a rookie quarterback as he's starting to hit his rookie wall, getting late into the season in an important divisional game where the coaching staffs are actually familiar with each other because Quinn was with the Cowboys in the division for years prior to being the head coach with the Commanders. So for so many reasons, I think this is a strong Eagles spot.
So I mentioned how I love the Lions to cover the spread. Another play that I absolutely love, the spread may have gotten a little too far out of control for me. That being said, I'd still lay it with the favorite versus going with the dog, and that is the Bengals at home against the Browns. We're looking at 9.5 now at this point in time, with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the starter, on the other side, rather than Jameis Winston. Not that he couldn't appear in this game at some point, but DTR, they have handed over the keys to him here for this one, and we know how just prolific this Bengals offense is. The defense, not so much, but what's DTR going to do against that defense with that cast that he has around him? To me, not much. And so, again, you talk about importance, desperation, teams that need to win. I mean, the Bengals need to win out to make the playoffs and get help. It's that much of an uphill battle. I think they get the job done tomorrow, though.
Am I allowed to call out other sports books and specific numbers on this program?
Sure. Go for it.
Okay. Then in response to that, I do think there's possibly still some value in grabbing the Bengals. I would go money line at this point. I know it's incredibly juiced, but you're looking at the sharpest books in Vegas, Circa, and Bookmaker. They have this at minus 460, minus 475, and you can get minus 450s or better across the market. So check your sports book. If you could execute a simple top-down strategy, I know it's a favorite late in the week, but the sharpest books have this pricier than is currently available at recreational books. So see if you can get a good price on a Bengals money line. I like Jerry Jeudy's under receiving yards. It's 66.5. You could find it minus 110 at a few shops. And I think it's very correlated to this DTR fade and that Jerry Jeudy popped so much under Jameis Winston. He was nowhere to be found in the league. And then Jameis started a few games. He became 4th in the league in reception yards. I expect that to majorly fade off, and I think we're getting a nice boost in his prop line because of how much he was getting the ball previously with the quarterback of Jameis, and now that switches with DTR. The Bengals do have a strong defensive line in Taylor Hendricks, despite the rest of their defense being pretty weak. So I think this is a buy the Bengals, even if you're playing a juice money line, maybe go with Jerry Jeudy's under as well.
I know you're not a parlay guy, but I don't lay the minus 450 or pair it with something. Put it with your Eagles play. Put it with the Lions. Put it with the Bills. Put it with something. Don't just lay it on the minus 450. More with Fiddle when we come back.
Don't cash out.
On Donner and Blitzen. Now, Rudolph, now!
Merry Christmas to all!
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred or just worked on the side or, kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
I remember one time, I don't know if Kenny will remember this. I said put 100 on, I think I left it on a text. Put 100 on this horse that won, and then Kenny called me back later and goes, "Hey, I never got the text." And I'm like,
no.
Oh yeah. Remember that, Kenny?
I would never stiff anybody. He texted me as they're loading into the gate, maybe. Like, it's too late.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
It's a new era in CFB to start off this year, put on full display.
My take on this game is simple. I know some people will be upset about it. Good riddance to the Pac-12.
Can you do it in terms of the week to week to week?
I don't see a pathway for this team to miss the college football playoffs.
We want to make sure you have those best bets in the entirety of our betting cards. That was thinking, but he had that program was already going there.
Only on SportsGrid.
Back here with Michael Fiddle, of course, Brady Kannon, Adam Kaufman. We are talking through the NFL as Ohio State cruising its way to advancing to the college football playoff quarterfinals. Game's not over yet, but it's over. I mean, up a ton against Tennessee right now.
It's also over
Michael,
the total, too.
It is over the total. Yeah, so that's there's nothing left to sweat there. Yeah. We have not really spent any time on this show so far talking about this Minnesota-Seattle game. Vikings are 3-point favorites on the road. I think it's obviously an interesting game in that it's very important with respect to the playoffs for both of these teams. I know for Minnesota, it's more about jockeying for seeding, still trying to win the first overall seed in the NFC. That is not out of the equation right now, sitting with the same record as Detroit. Do I think the Vikings will get there? No. But again, it's possible. And Seattle, obviously trying to be a playoff team. And so where ultimately do you lean in this game? Because despite the winning streak, I'm just not a huge believer in the Vikings long term. And Seattle's a team I don't believe in at all.
Yeah, I don't believe in Seattle at all. I do believe in the Vikings. I think they're so well coached, and I think their defense is so strong, and they have the run game and the lines on both sides of the ball to be dangerous when it gets in the colder months. But the way that I want to talk about this game, Adam, is through the lens of home field advantage. Now, this game is in Seattle. Seattle, Minnesota, and actually Lambeau, and I'll explain why, have been the strongest three home field advantages over the last decade. If you look at win rates and reference to the spread and you're quantifying how good those teams are, it's not just, hey, Chiefs win a lot at home, but they're the best team in the NFL. No, relative to the spread and how they've been projected as a team and how they do at home, those are some of the hardest places to play. So it's always tough to cap a game where Minnesota goes to Seattle because they're so good on their home field in their dome, and now they go to where the 12th man is so loud. So it's like, how do you understand what the weight of home field advantage is when one team leaves their home and goes to another strong place? And the reason why I want to tie in the Packers and Lambeau is because that's a recent opponent of these teams recently. The Vikings kind of kicked the Packers' butt, and then the Packers kind of kicked the Seahawks' butt. So I want to look at those in that lens and say, hey, the Packers did that in Seattle. The Vikings did that in Lambeau. So if you use like transitive property or chain law with the very math thing, come full circle on the show to coming back to Fiddle's a math nerd. If you use the transitive property, that would tell you to take Minnesota on the road against Seattle. Now, laying the 3, I actually think is okay to do because, again, obviously that's the most common key number. We have Geno banged up and maybe not being as mobile against a Flores defense that blitzes like crazy. You have Kenneth Walker coming off of an injury and Zach Charbonnet maybe playing through an injury. And then you have DK Metcalf, who hasn't really had a good game since week 7. So for so many reasons, I think not only do the numbers say it, not only does the home field, not only does the recent opponents, but the injury report says it too. I like the Vikings a lot in this spot.
The only thing, and I think you make a ton of sense, Michael, and it's very interesting how you tie in the home field advantage. I think Minnesota, you look at some of that research since they have that new stadium, that's a very strong home field advantage there for the Vikings. They have played 3 straight games in a row under the comfy confines of that dome. Now they're going to the Pacific Northwest, where you're supposed to get traditional rainy, wet, crap weather there in Seattle. I think it's a tough situation for Minnesota. I'm surprised this line is that low, and I think the books might be telling us something here.
Brady, I just looked up the weather report. It says 93% and definite rain is going to be in Seattle. So yeah, it's going to be a wet one. Maybe maybe I even lean Minnesota because of the way that they can do better on the ground. They have a better defensive line to stop Seattle's rushing attack. But yeah, that makes it, a little stuck in the mud. I will say the trip from Minnesota to Seattle, and a reason why some of these home field advantages are so strong is because they're in, distant parts of the country. Minnesota to Seattle, very quick trip. It's very different than going, Miami or Green Bay up to Seattle, to those places where you're going a long way. Minnesota to Seattle, easy, 1 hour plane ride.
We get less than a minute to go, Fiddle. 2 teams that are matching up tomorrow in a virtual pick'em in terms of the spread, both mathematically in the hunt for playoff spots. Neither one, of course, is going to make the playoffs. That is the Giants and the Dolphins. Where do you go here? Or pardon me, the Niners and the Dolphins.
I was saying, Giants are getting my main
what it was? I was thinking San Francisco, and my brain went to the Giants. No, the Niners and the Dolphins.
Oh. I call that a DBI, DWI. Don't bet it, don't watch it. It's gross. The only reason to watch it is to see the coaching battle. But I really don't know. I really don't. I have no opinion on that game at all.
Stinker.
I'm sorry.
Coaching battle is Mike McDaniel, established as a fraud already.
On, Donner and Blitzen. Now, Rudolph, now.
Merry Christmas to all!
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred or just worked on the side or, kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
I remember one time, I don't know if Kenny will remember this, I said put 100 on, I think I left it on a text, put 100 on this horse that won, and then Kenny called me back later and goes, hey, I never got the text. And I'm like,
no.
Oh yeah. Remember that, Kenny?
I would never stiff anybody. He texted me as they're loading into the gate, maybe, it's too late.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
It's a new era in CFB to start off this year, put on full display.
My take on this game is simple. I know some people will be upset about it. Good riddance to the Pac-12.
Can you do it in terms of the week to week to week?
I don't see a pathway for this team to miss the college football playoffs.
We want to make sure you have those best bets in the entirety of our betting cards. That was Lincoln! But he had that program was already going there!
Only on SportsGrid.
Our thanks to all of our guests, Michael Fiddle, Albert Wynn. We had Jeff Dawson, what feels like a lifetime ago, all the way back at the beginning. That's what happens over a 4-hour show, Brady. It just, all blends together. Tell you what.
Hey, I want to ask you something.
We've been tracking.
Adam.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears if you don't mind, because first of all, I'm personally interested. And it's that time of year. We're down to the final 3 weeks of the regular season, and football contests are getting down to the nitty-gritty. And we talked about this. We touched on it earlier. We're almost playing as much, if not more, game theory, contest theory at this point than we are handicapping football games. So if you're not a front runner, if you're not leading the Circus Sports Million, or you're in the top 10 or what have you, or the Westgate Super Contest, if you're a little bit behind and you need to make a move, what are a few ugly sides that you figure you would have to take, because you can't just ride with the majority. If you just ride with the majority, then you're not going to make up any ground. You have to hopefully catch a diamond in the rough, like the Tennessee Titans or the New Orleans Saints, that nobody's on and covers the number. Where are those stinky, slimy, hold your nose games this week for you that could possibly elevate you in a contest?
Well, for me, one is the Bears, but that's just because I've told you how much I like the Lions. But I don't know what the breakdown is in terms of what sort of support that game has. In terms of what you're talking about,
we saw the Lions was one of the most popular picks in Circa. So the Bears would be likely an unpopular side.
That's true. You know what? Actually, let me pull up. That will help. Let me pull up real quick.
Yeah, you can get a feel for where the majority and the minority are headed.
Yeah, and I will tell you which ones that if I were in that position like you're talking about, because I would be chasing for sure, that that I would be investing in. So let's see. None of the first 3 games that we've seen so far. I would say Browns plus 7.5.
That's a huge contrarian move, because that's likely to be the very most popular pick on the board. Yeah, and it was one of the most popular. Yeah. That's a huge contrarian move. That
would be a stinky side I'd be on. The most popular one as I look at it, Cowboys plus 3.5 is another stinky side that I could talk myself into. I mean, I don't believe it, but again, if I'm chasing and I'm trying to think outside the box and be contrarian, those are 2 right there. To me, it's not really reflected in the numbers, but to me, Patriots plus 14 is a very contrarian play. I don't think the Pats are going to be close tomorrow.
I really agree with you.
Another one actually is a game that we have not brought up, and I wanted to bring it up just before you transition to this. So it's actually a perfect question for it. You like to say, like, hold your nose and try not to throw up in your mouth when you're placing the bet. I have invested in the Jets plus 3.5 against the Rams tomorrow.
Wow.
Now, I don't really believe it. I don't really know why I did it.
Well, you got a good number with the hook.
I did. I got, and I never would have placed the bet at 3. So the hook does matter there. Never would have even considered it a 3. The hook, I think, is what put me over the edge, because I do love the Rams. I am a believer in the Rams. I have postseason futures on the Rams. I think this team is clicking.
But I was very surprised that they became one of the most popular picks in Circa. I thought that game would be light action.
Hugely popular. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at...
I was surprised by that.
I pulled up it's like 1,500 to 900 is the divide on this particular game, in favor, obviously, the Rams at -3, where that number is in this Circa Millions contest. But you can't ignore, even though it's completely meaningless for New York, how well Aaron Rodgers is playing right now. The connection, obviously, with Devontae Adams and how well he is playing. Garrett Wilson, we just know what he is capable of. Breece Hall, who is, he's facing a 22nd ranked run defense. I think I don't like the play, and I will not be at all surprised if and when it loses. But I think you can make the argument for the Jets to cover the number, and obviously if you're talking at 3.5, win the game potentially against the Rams. Even though the Rams have won 3 in a row, they're 8-6. They need this one. It's not quote-unquote must-win, but they need it. This is an important game in a crowded division. That would be near the top of the list of the plays that I hate that if I were chasing, I would invest in.
Yeah, no, I can get on board with that. And especially when you see these results from Circa, the Rams being that popular, the Jets become a very good, rogue, contrarian move, whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting, Adam, the wise guys out here in Las Vegas, I don't know if it's all over the country, but at a couple of books in particular, the wise guys bet the Jets almost every week. And they're not having a lot of success. But it's once again this week, when you crunch all the numbers, the Rams should not be a 3 or 4 point favorite in this game. Just the numbers. The Jets underperform. Their numbers are better than what they actually end up doing on the field. And it's true once again this week. And it's so Jets that when the season is shot and it doesn't matter anymore a lick, that Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers start lighting it up, and all of a sudden they're world beaters, right? I mean, so of course they're going to beat the Rams. When nothing matters and the season is cashed, the Jets finally start showing up and playing good football.
Yeah, 100%. Believe me, Patriots fan. Like, you don't need to look far for someone who's just going to bash on the Jets all day long. But especially when you look at some of the trends too. Like, we've talked about this, just last week, because again, it's a month-long trend. The Rams are 14-2 against the spread in their last 16 December games under Sean McVay, and that includes 3-0 this month. The Jets, on the other side, are 0-4
That's hard to figure out because they're a warm weather team, right?
True. I mean, I don't know the locations of all those games, but yeah, right. I mean, it's obviously this one is not out in LA, it's the Meadowlands. But the Jets 0-4 straight up, 1-3 ATS as an underdog this year. So there is all sorts of evidence that would point to the Jets not winning this game, not covering the number in this game. Certainly Kyron Williams is positioned well to go off against a shoddy run defense. And yet, I've invested in the Jets.
Yeah. Hey, that hook's important, man. You know that. Big difference between 3 and 3.5.
Yeah, so that's, I would say that is one of your chasing numbers. By the way,
I like all those that you mentioned.
Final.
Those are good calls.
Ohio State 42-17. Tennessee did get a late meaningless touchdown. Guess you could argue Ohio State's late, touchdown before that was kind of meaningless too. But 42-17, 59 points in this one. Ultimately, it did wind up being the highest scoring game of the day. We had 48 in South Dakota, Montana State, a game we have spent almost no time on. 49, South Dakota State, North Dakota State. SMU Penn State had 48. Texas and Clemson, no, they got up to 62. I take it back. So that game had 62 points, and Tennessee and Ohio State, again, the 59. But that means the quarterfinals are officially set, Brady. We've been talking about this throughout the show. But Texas, Arizona State, Ohio State, Oregon now. That will be New Year's Day at 5 o'clock Eastern. Penn State, Boise State, and Notre Dame and Georgia. So some good competition in there, obviously. I'll be curious, really. I think the game that I am most curious about, I know it should be Notre Dame and Georgia. For some reason, it's not. I really want to see if Arizona State can keep doing what it's doing. This team, for some reason, this team is, I know it got the bye. Like, it's not like people are sleeping on Arizona State. And yet, for some reason, you look at this grouping, and it just in name anyway, it sort of is like which one doesn't belong. Like, it feels like Arizona State doesn't belong, and I want to see if ultimately they knock off Texas. We'll talk more about it here with Brady when we come on back.
I'd like to have them in the 13 points. I think they're live.
Sure, it'd be fun. Setting you up for the semifinals.
On, Donner and Blitzen. Now, Rudolph, now.
Merry Christmas to all!
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred or just worked on the side or, kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
I remember one time, I don't know if Kenny will remember this. I said put 100 on, I think I left it on a text. Put 100 on this horse that won, and then Kenny called me back later and goes, "Hey, I never got the text." And I'm like,
no.
Oh yeah. Remember that, Kenny?
I would never stiff anybody. He texted me as they're loading into the gate, maybe. Like, it's too late.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
It's a new era in CFB to start off this year, put on full display.
My take on this game is simple. I know some people will be upset about it. Good riddance to the Pac-12.
Can you do it in terms of the week to week to week?
I don't see a pathway for this team to miss the college football playoffs.
We want to make sure you have those best bets in the entirety of our betting cards. That was playing, but he had that program was already going there.
Only on SportsGrid.
All right, back with Brady. Again, the quarterfinals are set in the college football playoff. Texas, Arizona State, Ohio State, Oregon. Those the Chick-fil-A, Peach Bowl, and Rose Bowl, respectively. The Fiesta Bowl is Penn State, Boise State, and the Sugar Bowl is Notre Dame and Georgia. I suppose, Brady, like we need to start to reference the bowls at this point, right? We don't just wait for, Cotton Bowl, Orange Bowl, and the national championship. We these aren't like the Insight.com bowls and the Duke's Mayo Bowl or whatever. Like we got a Sugar Bowl, Fiesta Bowl. Like we got to reference the Rose Bowl. Obviously, we got to reference these now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was looking through doing show prep today, and I knew we were going to focus heavily on the college football playoff. But Alabama, Michigan, I mean, it's a double-digit spread there in favor of the Crimson Tide. But, a couple of obviously massive football programs. So, yeah, some games to look forward to. I didn't even get to mention my Florida Gators with a huge win over Tulane. No, it's kind of great, Adam. The playoffs certainly get the focus, and we have more games this year. But meanwhile, there's all these other games going on too. So it's a smorgasbord out there for football fans like you and I.
Without a doubt, it's a ton of fun. And we were heading to break, so I didn't really get a chance to ask you which of the games, like I mentioned, for me, it's kind of Texas, Arizona State. Which of the games for you of these four now in the quarterfinals has the most intrigue?
Well, Notre Dame, Georgia, obviously, is very interesting and according to the point spread, expects to be the most competitive. But I think I'm with you. I'm interested in watching Boise, too. I want to see Aston Genty. I've seen him 3 times maybe this year, but I kind of want to see him on a national stage like this and see what he's able to show the rest of the world. I think ASU Texas is very interesting. This era, the whole Big 12 conference was so interesting this season. I mean, it looked like Iowa State, and then it was Kansas State. BYU was threatening, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Colorado was even in the hunt. And then out of nowhere comes Arizona State. I think it was going into that last weekend, there were 9 possible teams that could have gotten in to the Big 12 Conference Championship game. But this team has kind of under the radar, just continue to win games all season long. They beat Kansas. They beat Kansas State. They beat BYU. They beat Iowa State. And then they crushed Arizona. And I know Arizona wasn't great, but that was the game to close out their season. I think it was 45-7 or something. And in Scatabo, I mean, this guy's, he's no Ashton Jeanty. He's a different style, but he's really a heck of a running back that is worth watching.
So tell me if this surprises you. Remember, Oregon is the #1 overall seed in the college football playoff. Opening line on FanDuel, Ohio State, Oregon, has Ohio State favored by 1.5.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think some of that has to do with what they just did. You know,
Yep.
they crushed Tennessee. So there's some influence there. It's a revenge game for them. They lost to Oregon already, right? And that was a pretty close game, too. Oregon didn't exactly blow them out. Be interesting to see what the first move is there. If the wise guys drive it up to Ohio State -3, or if Oregon becomes the favorite.
Yeah, I'm curious. So we have lines for everything. Notre Dame, Georgia, we've been talking a lot about. Georgia's 1.5-point favorite. Boise State, Penn State, the 10.5-point favorite, as we touched on earlier. And you mentioned it before. Texas, universally a 13.5-point favorite in this game with Arizona State, where just, again, instinctively, and I haven't dug in yet, obviously, so I'm not locking anything in. Don't follow me on this, as far as placing a bet right now. But I'd like to say Arizona State plus 13.5. But where I'm probably more interested is looking at some team totals. And depending on, Texas, I was on the Texas over team total today. None of that is out yet. I'm just sort of scanning the board. But I'd be curious what Texas's team total is in this one, because we've got a relatively high total for the game, 51.5. Not the highest across these games. Ohio State, Oregon is 53.5. That is the highest. Notre Dame, Georgia, the lowest, unsurprisingly, at 44.5. But 51.5, Texas and Arizona State.
Yeah, I would tend to lean toward the over because I think that's really, a strength of Arizona State is their offense. Their defense has, people have been critical of their defense, but, they've also put together some very good defensive efforts as they got better throughout the season. Early on in the season, they certainly gave up some points. They were shocking early on, too. Nobody really expected much out of this team, and here they are getting a bye in the first round of the playoffs. But I think they have a lot more firepower than does Clemson, a lot more firepower on offense. And are they better defensively? I don't know. I would say they're not better, but I don't think they're that far worse. Clemson did not do a great job defensively and really hasn't done a tremendous job defensively all year. Ever since they lost Venables, it seems like that defense is different. I think Arizona State has a better chance and I thought Clemson had a good chance, but they really did not show up today. They disappointed me. I think Arizona State will show up.
We'll continue to keep an eye on these games, obviously, previewing them throughout the week, giving you all the best angles across SportsGrid programming. And Brady and I will be right back in these seats next week at the same time. So we'll be tracking these games, and it's going to be a nice way to take us that much closer. Not these games specifically, but bowl games, because these games aren't until New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. But it's fun just to have more meaningful, more important football here right around the corner, because the bowl games leading up to them, Brady, may not be, with all the, as we've talked about in the past with our guests, the unpredictability of how to bet these based around, who's declared for the draft and the transfer portal, who's leaving, coaches that have, changed programs as well. So some of those games just sort of keeping us busy until we get to these.
We've got a good one right here in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Bowl, USC and Texas A&M. That's one I'm looking forward to more than a lot of others. Should be a good contest here at Allegiant Stadium.
We will see which of the NFL games that we have not yet touched on. We've got one segment to go, and again, declare some of our favorite plays, if you can't tell already, coming up for your NFL Sunday in Week 16.
On, Donner and Blitzen. Now, Rudolph, now.
Merry Christmas to all!
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred or just worked on the side or, kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
I remember one time, I don't know if Kenny will remember this. I said put 100 on, I think I left it on a text. Put 100 on this horse that won, and then Kenny called me back later and goes, "Hey, I never got the text." And I'm like,
no.
Oh yeah. Remember that, Kenny?
I would never stiff anybody. What he texted me as they're loading into the gate, maybe. Like, it's too late.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
It's a new era in CFB to start off this year, put on full display.
My take on this game is simple. I know some people will be upset about it. Good riddance to the Pac-12.
Can you do it in terms of the week to week to week?
I don't see a pathway for this team to miss the college football playoffs.
We want to make sure you have those best bets in the entirety of our betting cards. That was Lincoln! But he had that program was already going there!
Only on SportsGrid.
Brady, the Buccaneers are between 3.5 and 4.5 point favorites tomorrow in Dallas. A total in this one of 48.5. We have not really spent any time on this game, kind of for good reason, but Tampa Bay is, of course, the leader in the NFC South and trying to ultimately win that division. What jumps out at me here, and it's a trend, I just don't know if you're enticed enough to want to buy in, but let me read you some numbers. Buccaneers lead the NFL with 31.6 points per game on the road. The Cowboys lead the NFL with 33.4 points per game allowed at home. 7 of the last 8 Cowboys opponents in Dallas have scored at least 27 points. This week's Bucs total, fittingly enough, is 26.5 points. Do you think we get a whole bunch of offense here out of Baker Mayfield and company?
Well, clearly, and to your point, they're an over team. They score points.
Yep.
I like this team. Baker Mayfield, boy, Sean McVay put him into a couple games there. I remember he had an incredible finish to beat the Raiders, and his career kind of just skyrocketed again. He was the number 1 pick and the Heisman and all that stuff, and he was okay in Cleveland. He wasn't great, but boy, all of a sudden he has taken off, and he's looking at winning his second straight division here with the Tampa Bay Bucs in the NFC South. And I think he's been a tremendous story. He's such a gamer, so competitive. He's diving all over the yard. He's like that NBA player that's diving all over the hardwood, right? I mean, Baker is fun to watch, and I don't know how this team necessarily does it. They're always banged up, and here they are again. They've got Cade Otton. One of his best targets is out of this game, the tight end. Now, Mike Evans, we know, is just incredible. This guy, once again, having a fantastic season. We know there's no Chris Godwin. Now you're without Cade Otton. KJ Britt, the linebacker, is listed as doubtful. Antoine Winfield is out. Let's see, the safety, Mike Edwards, is questionable. You've got another list of key guys that are injured for this game. And that's true for the Cowboys too. Their linebacker, Eric Kendricks, who I believe is their leading tackler, he's questionable. So, and Trayvon Diggs now out on IR. There are injuries on both sides of this ball, or on both sides of this game. I thought the Bucs would be a bigger favorite, quite honestly. I thought they'd be about a 6-point favorite here. If you just look at some of the numbers, I come out with them even a bigger favorite than that. and we just don't know what Dallas team is going to show up. I thought it was a great spot for them on the Monday night game, I believe it was, against the Bengals. They should have won the game, let alone covered it, and they found a way to not cover it and lose. And then I felt it was a great spot for Dallas last week. Carolina moves into the role of favorite, obviously didn't deserve to make that jump just yet, and Dallas showed up. But they've been awful at home this year, as, again, you pointed out, giving up over 33 points a game. This is a really tough one. You talked about taking the Cowboys as a stinky play in the contest or something. That might be the way you have to go here. But I think it's really hard to go against Tampa. It's a stay away for me is what it is, Adam. And I'm not sure what I would do. I probably could only take the Buccaneers because they just seem to find a way to get it done week in and week out.
All right, Brady, in the interest of time, because we mostly touched on every game, I guess didn't do a deep dive into like Raiders, Jaguars, or Cardinals, Panthers, but we mostly hit on everything, and we'll have more time tomorrow afternoon, so make sure you join In-Game Live Pro Football Game Day. That will include more on that very game, a Sunday Night Football preview that Brady will be part of. I'll be with Scott Wetzel and Joe Madden. But again, reset it for the people before we sign off. Your favorite plays tomorrow.
Yeah, my favorite play is the Commanders plus the 3.5. I do like the Cardinals. You mentioned the Cardinals and the Raiders. I like the Cardinals and the Raiders. I do have a money line parlay with the Cardinals and the Buccaneers. Okay, so I'm not going to mess with the points with Tampa Bay, but I'll take a money line parlay there. I think the Tennessee Titans will keep it close. I like the Seahawks. I like the 49ers. And I think the Patriots are going to be able to cover 14. So, some of those are what I'm involved with tomorrow. I do have the last leg of a teaser with the Lions plus 0.5. So I just need a win there out of Detroit.
All right, well, I need a cover. More than a win. You need a cover out of Detroit. Get the job done and reestablish yourself as the class of the NFC, even without Dave Montgomery. Watch for a monster game on Jahmyr Gibbs. That's right. Our thanks to Ohio State for covering. Brady, wish it was just a little bit below my beloved Buckeyes. Thanks to Tommy, everyone behind the scenes, all our guests. Back at you tomorrow. For Brady, I'm Adam. Happy Sunday, everyone. You're almost there.